Hi, everybody. Welcome to our June webinar. If you'd like to put in the chat where you're tuning in from, we're always very interested to know where our audience is located. And we'll just give it a couple of minutes for everybody to come in. Okay, so um, I am going to introduce the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy, and you're tuning into one of a series of webinars that we've been hosting. And tonight we're very happy to have Richard Grossinger speak on undiscovered science, the basis of homeopathic microdoses, succussion, apporting objects, and materialization. And I will introduce Richard in just a moment. But first, about the coalition. So you can visit our website at homeopathycoalition.ca, where you can find links to our YouTube channel, mailing list, social media pages, and you can stay up to date about future webinar offerings and other events. The Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy launched in April of 2022, and the mission of the coalition is to bring together patient associations, homeopathic practitioners, researchers, and industry stakeholders who wish to promote homeopathy in Canada and preserve the freedom of choice in medicine. The primary objectives of the coalition are to help educate the public about the many benefits of homeopathy, to debunk false information about homeopathy, to explore research which supports the efficacy of homeopathy, and to help to ensure that homeopathy remains accessible and available to Canadians. So again, we've had a series of webinars. There's more planned for next year. We're going to take a break over the summer, but we will resume again in September with speaker to be announced. And then we have a few more towards the end of the year as well. So if you'd like to catch up on our previous webinars, you can go to our YouTube page where you'll see we've had a number of very, very exciting presentations. Uh, Last month was a video recording by Rachel Roberts from Homeopathic Research Institute. Previous to that, we had Dr. Ronald Whitmont and many other very excellent presentations. And just a quick thank you to the Remedies app who have sponsored this series. And this is a great app for any home prescribers, those of you who are using homeopathy at home and need a useful guide. Please check out the app. It's free to download and explore. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the night. Mhm. Okay. So we're very pleased to have Richard with us. And for those of you who don't know Richard, he's been writing on homeopathy and various medical systems for decades. And recently released, Richard, I believe this is the third version of your book on homeopathy.
The third version, I guess the fourth, if you count the first version being four chapters in Planet Medicine,
I see. Okay.
which was so that was 1978.
I see. Okay. And here is the recent version. I'll
And
put,
everything that was in all the other versions that's important is in this one.
yes. And
Misunderstandings and other things are removed. So this is this is the cumulative version.
good, good. And the title is Homeopathy as Energy Medicine, Information in the Nanodose. And I will include a link to the book in the chat in just a minute. So, to introduce Richard, for those of you who don't know him, Richard was born in 1944 in New York City and was raised there. He attended Horace Mann School, Amherst College, earning a BA in English in 1966, and the University of Michigan, earning a PhD in anthropology in 1975. He did a year's field work with fishermen in Maine, 1969, before teaching at the University of Maine and Goddard College. Lindy Huff and he were married in Denver, Colorado in 1966. Together, they founded IO, a literary and occult journal in 1965, and North Atlantic Books, with whom he is no longer associated, a comparable esoteric and literary publisher in 1974. And together they have two children, Robin Grossinger, a geographer specializing in landscape resilience under climate change, and Miranda July, a multimedia artist, movie director, and novelist. Um, in 2020, Grossinger severed his ties with North Atlantic Books and became the acquiring editor for Sacred Planet Books at Inner Traditions. And Richard has written more than 30 widely acclaimed books on alternative medicine, cosmology, embryology, and consciousness. And some of the titles include Dark Pool of Light, Reality and Consciousness, The Night Sky, Soul and Cosmos, Bottoming Out the Universe, and of course, of interest to I'm sure everybody here tonight, homeopathy as energy medicine, information in the nanodose. So, with the introductions out of the way, Richard, I'd like to hand it over to you. We're very grateful to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Victor. Um, I have a number of ways I thought of starting. I don't do this often. I think this is my first webinar of this scale. But two things came up while the names were coming through and the your introduction. The first was I was reminded of the fact that when I first became interested in homeopathy in the it was in the let's see, it was really in the 60s, the late 60s. You had to spell it Homoeo, or people would be very offended. Um, and somehow that evaporated along the way. And I'd completely forgotten that until I sort of saw it there. And part of my mind was thinking, where's that O? And um, the other thing was I noticed Ronald Whitman. I assume that that's the son of Edward Whitman.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
and he was somebody who was extremely influential in my life and in my study of homeopathy. But way beyond that, he became a friend and a guide for many years. And I edited two of his books. One of them, Psyche and Substance, which was a homeopathy book. But the other, trying to remember exactly what it was called, it was The Alchemy of Healing or something like that. And that really was a homeopathy book, except it went much more deeply into the topic. And I quote widely from that in my own book. Um, so that's just where my mind went as you were presenting. What I had thought of to begin with was the fact that it felt presumptuous to be addressing homeopaths since I'm not a homeopath, I'm not trained in homeopathy. I took a course in it in the mid 70s, the first such course. I took a course with Dana Ullman when we lived for a long time in California. And during that time, I studied with Dana Ullman, and he also became a co-publisher of homeopathy books with me. And Harris Coulter was one of our first authors on homeopathy. And that now seems a very different era. Um, I, at no point have I really felt on top of the topic. Um, and I should say that I said to Victor beforehand, there are two kinds of talks. One where you write something out and you read it or you memorize it, and the other where you're in the moment and you create as you go along. That's definitely what I'm doing now. I'm thinking aloud in present time. And anyway, the book has pretty much anything I would say if I were to write a talk. So it would be somewhat a waste of time for me to present a prepared talk. Um, but when I was thinking about the beginning point, and also a structure for talking about this, I um, I kind of noted four phases, and to a certain degree, they are phases of overall intellectual development, as well as phases of understanding of homeopathy. And when we're done, I'd really be interested in the questions because I have nothing to tell the audience. I more want to lay out the kinds of the mysteries, the unresolved issues, and then hear the responses of some of the people who are here, which will come back through Victor, and we can then exchange thoughts. Um, so at first, I would mark the first period as being when I first learned of homeopathy. That was from a lay homeopath in Maine. It was because of that connection that I got to Maine. Ted Ensslin, Theodore Ted Ensslin. He's better known as a poet. And um, it was at a time when I had switched from English to anthropology and was looking for a study to do. And I had already tried what most interested me, which was shamanism. And what interested me, and I had spent a summer on the Hopi reservation and realized that it was over my head emotionally and intellectually to do that. Plus, there were too many other anthropologists, and I needed new territory. And at just about that time, the journal that Lindy and I co-edited, IO, was doing an issue on the doctrine of signatures. Um, and I won't go into that, but Ted submitted some poems and then said, "What about the doctrine of similars?" And I'd never heard of that. And it was roughly 19, let's see, it must have been like just the very early, no, it had to be the 60s. It was probably 1968. And that was my introduction to homeopathy. And I had to absorb how strange it seemed. Like, why should it work? Um, but it was intriguing. I was really um, sort of fascinated and engaged by the notion that the more dilute things became, the stronger their influence, at least in theory. And I was already getting in trouble with anthropologists there. And when I began bringing up stuff like this, I'd broken a basic rule, which was that we're not to fall into belief systems like shamanism, or in this case, homeopathy or any energy medicine. We're supposed to be studying it, but always holding to the fact that this is a social phenomenon, not a scientific or medical phenomenon. But I took the position that I was studying it because it was real, and I did get funded to go study it. And Ted was in Maine, and he had lined up some homeopaths for me to study in Western Maine. But when I got there, it turned out that none of them were actually interested or still practicing. And at the same time, I was getting so much resistance from the anthropology department that since um, my fellowship, the grant I got to do the study only specified that I do ethnography in Maine, I once again gave in to convenience and did the study of fishermen. And it was only 5 years later when I got around to writing Planet Medicine that I really returned to all the topics I wanted to study: shamanism, healing, and homeopathy, which made up a big part of that book. And I consider all that part of the first phase, um, because I I didn't have to figure it out. It was sort of like herbalism, or it was part of the same like 18th century and Renaissance cosmology that alchemy came out of. Alchemy was the our issue before homeopathy and before doctrine of signatures. So I I kind of just let go of the issue of figuring it out, but I also didn't particularly get involved in it myself. I took a few homeopathic remedies. I don't think Whitmont ever gave me a remedy. He more he more um, communicated verbal remedies. The first time I saw him, he didn't want to give me a remedy. He said the remedy would be finding out who my real father was, because it was right after my mother's suicide, and I just learned that she had me by an affair. And he basically set me in motion to find that out. And later years, many years later, like how long? I'd say 15 years later, but then I was living in Vermont, but 15 years later, I was living in California and struggling. And he called me in the middle of a panic attack while I was um, editing Alchemy of Healing. And he he spent an hour and a half with me on the phone talking about how panic is memory of past lives, reincarnational visions. And at the same time, he was communicating a version of homeopathy that threw into question what it actually was. For instance, sometimes he gave patients the remedy written down on a piece of paper. And instead of taking the remedy, instead of giving them the pills. So, what did that mean if that worked as well? Was it really psychic? But he denied that. He said it was, he still would give the remedy, and the remedy had incredible power because the pills themselves would expand energetically in ways that nothing else he knew did. And I wrote in the book that homeopathy requires believing in one of three things, all of which, or one or more of three things, all of which are kind of forbidden in regular science and in materialistic science: placebo effect, telekinesis, or just sheer magic. And Whitmont encouraged that so much that I began to think of homeopathy in psychic terms. And in my book, I write about, well, maybe you don't need to take the remedy. Maybe you can just take it psychically. Imagine, imagine the remedy. And I'll get back to that because I think that there's a really interesting um, kind of course of thinking that that you can do along those lines. But I wanted to finish by saying that all of that changed with my beginning to work with Vatsala Sperling, who is at this conference, this webinar, because um, I began to get her to take my case. Oh, I did want to mention that when Victor and I were talking before the session, that he mentioned the homeopath, was she in Switzerland, who knew the simillimum before the patient arrived, and that she wrote it down, and then the patient would arrive and she would already, and it would match, that she'd take the case and it would match. And that reminded me of an experiment that Jule Eisenbud, the parapsychologist, did with the Dutch psychic. I forget his first name, Quasset, Ger Gerard Quasset. I don't remember it, but Quasset would write down that they rent a theater and he'd write down information about the person sitting in each seat. But the seats, it wasn't known who would fill the seats until after he had written it down and tickets were dispensed randomly on the street. And then the show would consist of his reading aloud what um, what the person in each seat, something about them that he had seen. And some of them were remarkable. I don't know if it's just deep synchronicity that is present all the time and that anybody sitting in any seat would have worked. But that's sort of the same as saying you don't need to take the remedy, you just need to think it. Um, that's going to get so complicated that I can't dig in any further. But I've been taking Betzal as remedies. I have them here, and I've I've been doing that since 2020 when I became associated with her, and it's had continuously remarkable effects. So much so that things I've thought about going to the doctor over, the regular doctor, or mentioning, I don't mention because they've cleared up. And um, but what does that mean? Um, they've cleared up. They've cleared up in that the symptoms are gone, but would the disease really be gone or the pathology really be gone? It probably would be as if it didn't exist in the first place. Again, I'm just putting out questions. Um, it's the kind of issue that's gotten, it hasn't risen to the surface in terms of homeopathy, but it's really gotten, it's come closer to the surface of the culture with the political issues that have arisen with these authoritarian regimes, well, in the US, which favors, in a sense, energy medicine in a way that the more progressive liberal um, regimes don't. So, whereas I may oppose them in so many other ways politically, I I am relieved to see much more tolerance for what the angry people, the angry, more scientific liberal people are calling quackery. But then again, that's another departure. I don't another. It's just one of the things I'd like to throw out. Um, to return to the theme I left hanging about psychic homeopathy. Um, I began a study in, I think, around 2009 with John Friedlander, who's a psychic who sat with Jane Roberts during a lot of the period when she channeled Seth, the interdimensional entity. And again, I don't want to get into that in too great detail, but John's a very complex person. He attended these events while he was at Harvard Law School, and he he also developed a system which was not tied down entirely to Jane Roberts and to Seth. So um, I learned that system, and it's involved with seven planes: the physical plane, the physical etheric plane, the astral plane, the mental causal plane, the Buddhic plane, the the Atmic plane, the monadic plane, and the Adi plane, which has nothing we can recognize in it. Um, Victor, my whole screen changed. I'm assuming you're still there. Yes, you are.
Yes, I'm here.
Um, um, so um, when I learned the system, I was told that acupuncture is practiced in the etheric plane, the etheric subplanes, and homeopathy is practiced in the astral plane. Now, what does that mean? Aside from, I mean, to me, it gives a bit of a rationale for people who aren't troubled by non-physical rationales. Um, and John always liked to say that the acupuncture, that the etheric plane, the lower etheric plane, is almost physical. So you can feel the current, and you can feel the current in terms of acupuncture. For a long time, I kind of abandoned homeopathy for somatics like osteopathic techniques and acupuncture because I could feel the energy. And with homeopathy, I really didn't feel anything. It's like is so often said, you just get better, and then you think, well, that's gone. But there isn't a palpable current, at least for me, and that that kind of caused me to lose interest in homeopathy to a certain degree because these other things were so available. Like I took a 3-year course that met once a week in cranial sacral therapy and learned the level of touch and how you could feel the energy moving. You could feel the fascia. You could feel the basically you could feel the etheric field. But you can't. Homeopathy is not like that. But then I began doing a psychic group in Maine because we were splitting the year between Maine and California. And in the group, I practiced going through the 7 planes, starting at the physical plane and then working up through the etheric, the astral, and so on. And in the astral, I had people develop remedies um, and give themselves remedies. But then I didn't stop there because I think even though the Atmic plane, the 5th plane, is complementary to the etheric, it was there that I I'm not sure how to say it. It wasn't just a matter of making remedies, it was a matter of creating the reality that becomes physical in the etheric plane. So it was sort of, I think the Atmic is corresponds to the etheric, and the Buddhic corresponds to the astral. But I'm not sure. But you in the Atmic plane, you not only gave yourself a remedy, you recreated your own body as if it were etheric while giving a remedy. So it was a kind of combination thing. Um, I I think of that as it's it's is it homeopathy? That's an open question, but it is a way of thinking about it. When Victor proposed this conference, I was very much involved in the concept of apports, which was new to me and came from a friend back in California in Berkeley, Dan Drayson, who had studied apports, which were better known as objects which appeared during seances. They often just fell out of the sky, or the room, really, not the sky, but fell out of the ceiling, and they were from other centuries, or um, musical object like an accordion would appear playing itself. And this was an Apport. Now, I had gotten COVID in August and September of last year, a really strong case, and I began experiencing objects appearing and disappearing while I was sick. And yes, I was taking homeopathic remedies, and I also was taking the forbidden ivermectin, um, and supplements. And eventually I got better, but I had a really profound experience of confronting entities in the world of the ailment. And these objects were like my cell phone got lost for 3 days. And then a car we rarely use began honking, and I went outside to turn it off, and my cell phone fell into my lap. And after I got better in October, November, I forgot about it. And then this very startling event happened, which I um, I I have described many times. Trying to describe it fresh. Um, we had these iPods, and we had two of them. Lindy and I each had one. And when I was sick in Bar Harbor, where we lived part of the time, I had when we went to Portland, partly to get treatment, because then I got pneumonia after COVID. I left my iPod behind in Bar Harbor, and we only had hers, so we were using it on this dock in the living room when we wanted to listen to things. And then it just disappeared. And I was, I didn't see how that was possible. I searched all over for it. I moved furniture and it wasn't there. That was around December 10th or 11th. And then we went back to Bar Harbor, and it was sitting on the kitchen counter. And I thought about this for a long time, that there was there was no wiggle room, is what I said. I This had happened, and the object, and then I told Dan said, "Well, I never heard of an Apport over 160 miles, but that's what you had." And other people have experienced it. They've lost things while moving, and then when they arrived, the object was there. Um, and so it it really changed my sense of the world. And another author I had within her traditions, Keith Thompson, had done a book on UFOs. He had done two books, back in the late 80s that he had redone as the UFO paradox. And I said to him, is it not possible that UFOs are in fact apports, that they're not spacecraft or anything like it, that they're more akin to these objects that disappear, reappear, and disappear. And in a sense, they're like homeopathic remedies, in that they draw on a system of energy that is otherwise certainly unknown to science. And he's now working on a book about that, which he's calling Materialization. And at the time that we thought up this seminar, I threw those terms into it, and so I wanted to work them in without exactly without exactly knowing how they would apply to homeopathy. But I felt intuitively that this was all part of a broader system, which then related to something that I've written about extensively, which is embryology. Um, from the time I started writing about embryology, I thought about the fact that it's really pretty amazing that that the formation of bodies from single cells is explained in totally mechanical terms as essentially heat effects translated into information. If you go down to the kind of basis between physics and biology, where physics turns into biology, I think that homeopathy occurs at exactly that same spot. It its energy enters at an embryogenic level, thus affects the body in terms of its formation. In that sense, it is etheric. It may come from the astral realm, but it crosses the etheric realm where bodies form. Let me think. What when you throw things like this out, you almost have to stop and think and catch up to where you've gotten yourself and everyone else to make sure that the next step is going to work. Um, the um, the larger prospect which frames all this is the mystery of existence. So, in the biggest sense, homeopathy is the medicine operating at the level of the mystery of existence itself. And um, that that covers a large amount of what I wanted to say. It almost gets me to the point where I want to take questions, except for one thing, which is sort of the biggest chance I'm going to take. Um, but that makes it more interesting. Um, I had a dream last night um, at around 4:30. This book we got for Inner Traditions from a Dzogchen monastery in New York State says that it's a book on dream yoga. It says that dreams that occur very, very late are the most prophetic dreams. So this was a dream after falling back asleep at maybe 4 in the morning, after having gone to bed too late. Um, I actually am gonna I want to capture there since there is time. I want to capture like leave that hanging and capture one thing I forgot about airports, which is that when we left to come back to Portland, that Lindy's iPod was missing again. And where it had been was an object we had never seen, a light dimmer um, that wasn't part of our household, and it's still there. And I jokingly said, well, let's see if the iPod is sitting in Portland when we get back. And when we got there, it wasn't there. And I searched, and after a week or two, I gave up, and because we had already bought another one and I online, so I said, well, we have two, and it's not a problem, and I don't know where it went. And then one night in January, um, I was staying up late, uh, since this is the Canadian Homeopathic Associate Coalition, Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy. I will say that I was following and rooting for the Ottawa Senators in hockey and following them online, and they were playing a very late game in some place like Vancouver or Seattle. And in between the second and third period, I went upstairs to get Lindy's iPod to sync it with to because you sync it. The files were on my computer, and the missing iPod was just sitting next to it in her drawer. And I asked her in the morning. I said, "Did you bring it down and not tell me?" And she didn't know. She didn't. She didn't know it was there. So then I haven't had anything notable since, but I've had many people tell me about similar experiences. Um, uh, many, many people. And Keith Thompson has been collecting them for his book. And I did an interview with him a while back that's in my Substack series of interviews. So to go back to the dream, this dream was very late and I haven't written it down. So, and as the day goes on, you remember less and less. And I don't know exactly why it has to do with this conference, except that as somebody who was taught dream interpretation by a psychiatrist when he was 8, I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm pretty good at it, at my own and other people's dreams. And this one was baffling. I could not find any connection to anything. And the only thing I thought of was giving this talk today and about the fact that Vatsala, as a homeopath, began in India. And I wanted to tell her this dream, but we when she's in Costa Rica, as she is, we don't really talk. So here I can sort of kill two birds with one stone and also communicate the dream to her without having to type it all out, at least what I remember. In the dream, now I can see that a lot of it is dissolved, but in the dream, I'm carrying around coins because I'm supposed to pay for something. And I have regular American money, but the more I hold the coins, they are changing currency. And I'm carrying around all different currencies and I'm not sure how to use them. That, as I say, it makes me think about remedies. Um, while I'm carrying them around, I realized that I have a lot of Indian coins. I don't actually know what Indian coins look like, but I think about the fact that Vatsala came from India and um, studied other medicine besides just homeopathy. And I am not sure what to do with these coins. And I go outside. We are in Portland now, but then the dream switches to either our Bar Harbor house or someplace entirely unknown to a garden where there's a lot of dirt. And now I'm remembering that we lost something there once and had to dig in the dirt looking for it a long time ago. I can't remember what it was. We thought maybe a child who was visiting had hidden it. But when I'm digging in the dirt, suddenly the Indian coins have turned into incredibly large objects, like almost a foot across, a little bit like big mica slabs. Not big, dense, but thin mica slabs, very irregularly shaped and very shiny. And I'm trying to carry them. And I'm not sure what to do, but I realized that I should bury them. So I dig in the dirt. And as I'm trying to put them in the dirt, I come to a horrific object. There's a body wrapped in a shroud. And I'm horrified that I've uncovered it. And I start to put the dirt back. But then a voice says, Um, no, it isn't really a body. It's information which is wrapped in the shroud. And you have to just carefully rebury it and rebury the money with it. So I'm somewhat relieved. And as I talk, I can see the homeopathic metaphors here, um, whether they're suggestive from this talk or part of the dream, my own dream introduction to it. As I'm reburying it, I feel a great deal of relief, although I do undo the shroud and peek to see what the information looks like. But it's all like floating numbers and letters, and I can't actually see them. It's like people who have photographic memories and as a trick will look at a page in a telephone book, a telephone directory, an old telephone directory, and then read you back every line with the address and phone number. You can only do that if you take a picture in your mind. Well, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like these are the letters and numbers accumulated in the brain. Only that was the person, and the person has long been dead. So I am in the process of burying it when I wake up, and that's the end of the dream. So I I want to proceed with Victor's help to an exchange on any of this.
Great. Okay. So there are a number of questions, but perhaps we can talk about one of the very interesting claims that you make in your book, and you can take it in whichever direction you like. But in your book, you write that homeopathy is the medicine of a future science. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that claim, and because I found it very striking, and um, it raises a lot of questions in my mind, and I'm sure in other people's minds too. What does it mean to have a medicine of a future science?
I feel as though what I wrote in the book was a little bit inflated because I don't think that homeopathy is going to solve the climate crisis. And I kind of implied that. I implied that maybe there's a planetary homeopathy so we can give energy medicine to the planet. But what I do think is that the boundaries of the energy system that homeopathy comes out of, wherever it's rooted, that those boundaries are unprobed. And that's an optimistic thing because if objects can appear and disappear, UFOs can appear and disappear and can move, then it's possible that there are forms of physics that lie outside of Newtonian and even Einsteinian views of reality. And so homeopathy is somewhat of a placeholder for that. And everyone who's at this conference is practicing a future science. They have no choice. I would imagine with 250 or so people that there are 250 different variations of belief systems.
Yes. Yeah. And we are in homeopathy dealing with, I mean, Hahnemann termed it the vital force, and I think it can be argued that the vital force is perhaps the fifth fundamental force of nature, alongside the gravitational force, electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, and that we have this deep reaching cognition in homeopathy of a vital force that is actually expressed both in life and in death. Um, so perhaps you can say something about your understanding of the homeopathic notion of the vital force, and perhaps how it relates to other branches of medicine or healing or cosmology that you've written about and studied in your work.
Well, it seems to me that the embryogenic force is a form of the vital force. In one of my books, one of the two embryology books I wrote, I said all matter is thermodynamic, but some matter becomes embryogenic. Um, but if some matter becomes embryogenic, then all matter is potentially embryogenic, even if it's on a planet that doesn't have the conditions for life, or at least life as we know it. But it has energetic potential. So um, science sees a very dead universe, a universe in which it imagines life elsewhere among the trillions of worlds, but most of them are unsuited to life. But at an at the level of the vital force, it would be present it would kind of hold the whole universe together. And and we just would, since we can't see the vital force here, and there's so many discouraging signs, you think of whatever ones you want to, that you think, well, we're really in quite the opposite of a vitalistic situation. We're in more of a is it entropy or disintegration? But I don't think anything would be here, either consciousness or life, without the vital force. So John Friedlander says, I don't have this exactly right, but he says all consciousness or all realities expanding in all directions at all times because it couldn't not. And to me, that's another expression of the vital force. Um, and that was certainly the original language in which I thought about homeopathy, and Harris Coulter did too. He spoke of the empirical tradition and the vitalistic tradition. They didn't exactly overlap with each other, but they they overlap partially and stand against I'm forgetting what the rationalist and the materialistic viewpoints.
Okay, excellent. And we were speaking before the webinar started a little bit about homeopathy and synchronicity. And I think that would be an interesting topic to consider because when we look at homeopathy and we look at the effects of remedies, and even homeopathic provings, we do see a certain resonance phenomena where there are the so-called boundaries between inner and outer um, begin to disappear. And we even see that the effects of a remedy or the effects of a proving can have resonance in various places. They're non-local kinds of effects. And there are various examples that we could cite in terms of individual cases, but even again, it's a well documented example is in the proving of the remedy neon, one of the noble gases by Jeremy Shear, where one of the provers who took the remedy uh, woke the day after to find a load of broken neon tubes outside of her house in the morning that someone had thrown there to get rid of overnight. And of course, the prover had no idea what the remedy was. So we see these kinds of resonance phenomena or field effects or synchronicities. And so perhaps, and you speak about this in your work, but perhaps you can expand a little bit about on the notion of synchronicity and if there is any way in which uh, the homeopathic medical tradition um, has a unique approach or sheds any light on the phenomena of synchronicity from your perspective.
The I had thought of synchronicity. In my thinking, it's had stopped kind of with the Jung-Pauli discussion of synchronicity and its tie into astrology and so forth. But then within her traditions, when I got Bernie Beitman as an author, who's known as Dr. Synchronicity, he's a psychiatrist in Virginia who, and in the very same town as Charlottesville, as the studies of reincarnation have taken place, Ian Stevenson and so forth. He has studied synchronicity, and I did an interview with him. This interview I'm doing, or this talk and interview, kind of goes in a series I'm doing on Substack, and you can find it. I guess you can look it up under. We renamed it Jovian bricolage, like the Levi-Straussian term bricolage. Jovian for the planet Jupiter. It's just words. Jovian bricolage. If you look that up, you can then subscribe or just listen to particular talks. I think they're free And I maybe 3 or 4 talks back, I interviewed Bernie on synchronicity. And um, I don't think we mentioned homeopathy, but it's an obvious example. The example of neon is so striking because I mean, I can't think of the example, but it reminds me of some like chaos magic things that people who consider themselves working with chaos magic have experienced. Um, you think you're working with like sigils at one level, and all of a sudden you manifest something really huge that you're not prepared for. And energetically, homeopathy is like that. That you're working with less and less and less and less. You're working below zero and getting further and further below zero, but you're also specifying. And so you're creating something very big. And it doesn't manifest visibly, it manifests um, energetically. Um, and that's that's on the same level as synchronicity. I One thing I thought of the case of Bridie Murphy, which was kind of the first American reawakening to the reincarnation issue. Um, in Denver, a psychiatrist. No, I don't think he was a psychiatrist. He was, I think, just a writer or interviewer. Maury Bernstein hypnotized a woman to go back in time and go back past her birth, and she found herself being Bridie Murphy in 18th century, I think, Ireland. And the Daily Mirror, which was a newspaper in New York at the time, I was a teenager and very interested, and I got the Mirror every day, which was the point, to see what their researcher had found in Ireland, and he found nothing except very minor links that connected her to that proved that Bridie Murphy existed even. And it was also discovered that living across the street was a woman named Bridie Murphy. And that did it as far as they were concerned. She hadn't gone back to a past life. She had just picked up information from across the street. But it struck me that that missed the whole point because couldn't there be a synchronicity such that the person living across the street had the same name as herself in a previous life? Um, it's it's not um, it's not something that's proven one way, but it wasn't disproven by Bridie Murphy living across the street. And that's kind of how I think of synchronicity and how I mean, of homeopathic provings also. Um, there are a lot of mixed metaphors there, but because when you prove, you're not proving in a scientific sense, but you are proving in a homeopathic sense. And when doing so, you can manifest neon light bulbs outside your house. Um, or you can apport something in another context. And somehow it just seems to me that all this material is connected.
Hmm. Okay. So we have a number of comments and questions in the chat from some of the participants. Um, so let's see where to start here. Mm. One person is wondering about how the energy or information in a homeopathic remedy persists and is not overwhelmed by grosser matter or energy already present in the environment. Um, so I guess they're asking about how the energy or purity of the remedy can be maintained or even produced. Oh, I guess the question is I guess the question that the participant is asking about is your understanding or conceptualization of what this substance that is not a substance that is the homeopathic remedy is, and how that informational pattern can persist over time.
Well, that is one of the great questions, and Harris Coulter, in his four-volume history of medicine, raises that when writing about the Civil War era when homeopathy was in such dominance, and its allopathic critics were saying, well, the Mississippi River has potentized just about everything. Um, and and so on along those lines. And I don't know that there is a great answer for that. Again, it goes back to some degree to um, what I would call telekinesis or also intentionality. But in homeopathic terms, it has something to do with specificity, that the remedy is somehow specified, and the Mississippi is not specifying. It's just mixing everything together. Um, and so everything is canceling everything else out. So the homeopathic remedy has a signal kind of locked into it. It's like a very distant object that casts a very large signal. In my book, I actually use the astrological metaphor. I don't know if it's a metaphor or a kind of homology or what you'd call it, but the planet Pluto, which is no longer even officially a planet, is given enormous power in astrology equal to the power of the sun or Jupiter, which are absurdly larger. And I was thinking, well, that power is not in terms of like cures like, but in terms of the microdose or nanodose, that is homeopathic, that Pluto plays a homeopathic role in astrology. And if somebody else has, I imagine among the participants, I bet there's some really good ideas about what the difference is between the sort of Mississippi River version of potentization and the homeopathic method, because they wouldn't be practicing it otherwise.
Yes. Okay. Um, Someone is asking, I'm not sure if you have an opinion about this, but someone is asking, how would you reorganize the homeopathic materia medica?
Um, it isn't really a question for me. I would pass that on to Vatsala and ask. My understanding is that it's reorganized online so that you can search, but I would be very suspicious of applying artificial intelligence to it.
Yeah,
I was thinking
someone is
about this
asking that.
because
Someone is asking about that actually. That's one of the next questions concerning the possible role of artificial intelligence in the future of homeopathy.
I would like to think it has no role, but of course, anything that might be useful should be used. Um, I artificial intelligence seems to me like sort of the Mississippi. It's everything being potentized simultaneously. Um, I would think that in an attempt to use it to figure out a remedy, you would run into the problem that the system of consciousness and the system of individualization would be entirely baffling to artificial intelligence. The question, I guess, would be is what if you develop, and I don't understand artificial intelligence well enough to know this for sure, But what if you had an artificial intelligence that was only homeopathic, that only sort of grazed on homeopathic grass in building up its voice? Um, but no, it seems that that would again de-individualize. You would not end up with an individual solution, and you certainly couldn't end up. I mean, if you ended up with neon light bulbs outside your house, it would probably just be. I mean, that would be the um, the kind of case in point for like criticizing artificial intelligence as not being intelligent at all, just sort of copying what existed before. So I think it wouldn't individualize, but um, what does anybody else think about that?
Hmm. Yeah. So if anybody would like to chime in, you can type your responses in the chat, and we can talk further on that issue. Um, okay. So we have a question here. Uh, Homeopathy is intentionally a healing energy of the universe, not yet tainted completely by humans and other beings. Although the best healing is observing, talking to the body, and allowing to let the energy be in a space of its own realignment, which leads to physical and mental healing. So I'm not sure if that's a question or more of a comment.
Well, um, it's kind of okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're the, there's a kind of poetry of homeopathy, and that's kind of like a poetics of homeopathy. I think it is of all energy medicines. Um, I don't have the same experience of every one. Um, but like an author of mine at Inner Traditions, Ruslana Remenikova, who shares the Substack account with me, she does sound healing and also um, DNA vibration, which she works with 12-stranded DNA. She's trained in microbiology and she moved into this form of energy healing. Um, I haven't responded, and she sent me some audios that I've listened to, and I haven't yet responded to that, but I I think that there are probably limitless forms of energy medicine and that they attune to individuals at different levels and also at different points in their life.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Hmm. So there is, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but someone has left a comment here. Um, they resonated with your biography. They said, wanted to share a similar unique aspect to your story and mine. My mom attempted to commit suicide, failed, but it destroyed her mind in the doing. I learned after her passing that she had an affair with another man as well, that he was my father, not the man that I was told was. Um, and now this person is connected with 8 siblings, and they said that they never heard anyone who shared similar circumstances. I just wanted to share that with you in case you hadn't seen it.
I, I I've not looked at the flow of things because it's easy to get distracted.
Yes.
If that's sort of like, looking at your cell phone while driving, you could crash and I could lose the thread. But yes, that is kind of resembles my story. I mean, all stories like that have some variations, but that has a certain amount of correspondence. My um, Mine has a twist in that my mother's affair while she was married to my legal father, whose last name I have, um, was before she married my stepfather, whose name I was raised under, which is a whole different name. I was Richard Towers until I was 12. And then at age 9, I was told who my real father was, but he wasn't, he's just my legal father. And then at age 12, my name finally got changed to his, but legally it always had been that. And I didn't question it until I was 30, and that was the year my mother committed suicide. And later, my brother and sister that I shared with her also would. But right afterwards, I found out that she had had me by an affair. The man's name was, he went by the name of Bingo Brandt. And so that would be my, I mean, it would have been my last name if I had my blood last name. But then all of these names are kind of Americanized. Um, uh, Grossinger isn't, but my Towers was my stepfather's name, Americanized from Turetsky. And I imagine Brandt was Americanized from something else. So I'm not just, so that doesn't seem to be as important as the fact. But what made me think of the phases of homeopathy was I was thinking of that the phases of accepting this father who I never met. He didn't want to meet me during his lifetime, and it's been a long time since he was alive. Um, that I went through phases with that too. Um, and in the current phase, I finally accepted that meeting him, knowing his name, meeting the four half siblings I have, half brothers I have through him, none of that amounted to anything. What matters, and I say this just to that one person, maybe she shares that. What matters is that he's inside me in some sense. I mean, I think that there's a spirit form to our being that's different from the genetics, but as far as genes go and capacities like physical and mental capacities, I have the benefit of carrying him inside me. Apparently, he wasn't to everyone the most wonderful person. He did not have a good reputation. And so it does seem a kind of magical thing at this point to carry him without having known him. But this isn't really the homeopathy topic, so we can go back.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that in case you hadn't seen it. Yeah. Um, okay, and somebody is asking about, I guess it relates to the success of what they call the success of homeopathy. They're wondering if you feel that there are what you feel is blocking the success of homeopathy as a whole. Um, and of course, it's a subjective perspective that homeopathy is not successful. It's gone in, of course, phases of acceptance, but it depends where you look in the world, of course. But I guess the question that they're trying to ask is uh, what, in your mind, what puts homeopathy at odds with the uh, you could say the consensus paradigms that operate in the world today, and what are the factors at play that perhaps stop homeopathy from establishing itself as fully as it has in some parts of the world or as it has historically?
I wonder, I don't know how the map actually falls. Like obviously in Europe, in Western Europe, and I think in Eastern Europe too, it's much more accepted. And but I don't know about Asia. And I think in the English speaking world, the former colon, well, not India, but many of the colonies of England, like Canada and certainly the United States and New Zealand and Australia, that the materialistic paradigm dominates. I don't know about New Zealand or Australia exactly, but I suspect that homeopathy has a hard time there too. Um, Probably has the hardest time in the United States, where the materialistic paradigm is the strongest. And I think the materialistic paradigm has a tremendous amount of power because it's produced automobiles and jet planes and MRI devices. And what's homeopathy produced like that? It's an era of materialistic conveniences. And I write in other books, like in Bottoming Out the Universe, I write about the fact that all of these objects are thought forms too, that airplanes and cars and telescopes and MRI machines, that they arise from stone tools. The line from like hand axes to MRI devices is it's a very gradual mechanical process through the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, etc. But there's also, I think, a thought element to it too, that over long periods of time, human beings create the objects that they want, so that we are experiencing now thought forms that were dreamed of during, like, the Stone Age, when when the dreamers were wanted food, transportation, shelter, and the universe said, well, those are very difficult thought forms. That's going to take quite a few millennia to develop. But I don't think you can get there just material. But definitely the going theory, and this is leads to artificial intelligence and all of the kind of impositions of materialism. And I have an author at Inner Traditions, Alana Freeland, who writes, she's a Steinerite, a theosophist, but she writes a really powerful critique of the materialistic model and what it's attempting to do to our bodies and souls and spirit forms. So I've broadened the issue a lot, but um, I think that there isn't um, there isn't a you can't. I mean, I feel I do both, and many of my friends do both, but it's kind of seems to others a Faustian bargain. On Facebook, I have friends who rail against energy medicine, who I agree with on lots of other things. And I watch Dana Ullman do battle on his Facebook pages with people who challenge homeopathy. And he's made a life career out of like being a knight for homeopathy, waging its battles. Um, and I I think that um, I think that in a world in which homeopathy is more successful, um, you do have people who accept contradictory paradigms at the same time. But this isn't really the era for that. It's not even the era for political reconciliation. So to have cosmological reconciliation is asking a lot.
Okay. And and uh and perhaps then you can talk about uh, the thought form underlying homeopathy. I mean, you relate homeopathy to the alchemical tradition, which I think more and more people are attempting to do and seeing the connections, even though Hahnemann never explicitly referenced anybody like Paracelsus, though undoubtedly he was aware of Paracelsus's work, given his occupation as a translator of medical texts. And it is striking that we see that both in Paracelsus and in Hahnemann, there's the understanding that the underlying source and also meaning of disease couldn't be approached through mechanical, chemical, or physiological even modes of understanding, and that perhaps what put both Paracelsus and Hahnemann um, at odds with the dominant medical paradigms of their respective times was that the conventional materialistic stream of medicine sought to essentially treat the diseased organs themselves, which are essentially, from the homeopathic and alchemical perspective, only the external effect of internal or spiritual causes. And the conventional system is oriented around essentially mechanical or chemical means of affecting these external causes of affecting the external organs, whereas Paracelsus and Hahnemann both tried to change the interior spiritual causes from which the outward effects stemmed.
And
So,
of the materials too, like try to transmutation is applies both to alchemy and to homeopathy. And the difference is that Hahnemann chose to carry out that transformation on a microdose level. And um, Paracelsus chose to carry it out, like so many other alchemists, on in test tubes on a macro level. Um, and they and I think that that just was a difference of their times in the world, that Hahnemann was in a more algebraic time, and and he could conduct his alchemy without uh, like at a level of pure energy. He didn't have to manufacture it through mixing chemicals. But it's an interesting question. Um, Back before I knew about much about homeopathy, I used to think about alchemy a lot and wonder how it could work. I think as long ago as high school, alchemy became of interest to us a group of us, along with alchemy, along with tarot cards, and then other things would fall into that form later as the world expanded, the world of these things. Um, but another thing I was thinking was that it's quite possible that in the Stone Age and in the pre-homeopathic days of civilization, that it was still practiced unknowingly. And in when I wrote Planet Medicine, part of it I wrote by going to the anthropology library at the University of California in Berkeley then and going shelf by shelf and going through every book until I found something about medicine and writing it down and then making a list. And in my list, there were a lot of techniques that sounded like potentization that came from use of water, drumming, um, um, I don't remember them all, but the potentization um, was understood, at least implicitly, a long time before it was conceptualized. And also acupuncture shows up in the use of thorns medicinally early. And um, And manual medicine, somatics, probably also goes back to like the the sort of early periods when there were herbalists and shamans and some people who practice both. Um,
Mhm.
I'll there have other questions. So
Yeah, and I mean the question of potentization, of course, is a very interesting one because when we look at it from the perspective of homeopathy, it means that and this is a topic that Whitmont wrote about in his own way, but we essentially see that with homeopathic potentized substances that the immensely complicated human morphology appears to be a kind of compendium or synthesis of all natural forms, such
yeah,
that then purely dynamic influences can bring about a deep metamorphosis or change on that level. And we also see that with potentization, we arrive at a medicine in which the remedy and the disease actually are the same. Yeah, if a person is prescribed, um, and I think you give an example of this in your book with aurum metallicum, where you talk about description of aurum that was explained to the patient and said, your disease is aurum, your disease is gold. And so this is something also that the homeopathic potentization opens up to understand actually the medicine and the disease as the same phenomena.
yeah, that there's a morphological similarity, and that this comes up. I didn't read it at length, but I saw online today talking about the Oort cloud of small asteroid-like bodies or dwarf planets actually resembles the spiral form of the galaxy itself. Um, and again, guess I didn't find it that interesting, so I didn't read it at length. But there is this sort of morphological similarity. I used to in the when Lindy and I were doing IO in the old days, I gave it a particular look by pasting in images that look like each other but were very different things, like a plant next to ram's horns or a shell, um, and how those shapes were very similar. Um, and I remember thinking very early about how thought was like seaweed, how the thoughts branch out and run one into another like sort of fronds of seaweed branching out.
Okay. I'm just checking to see here if we have any further questions that haven't been addressed so far. Um, any concluding thoughts or final points of discussion, Richard? Anything you'd like to conclude with?
Um, I see a woman says she had a question, but my own conclusion is I'm just grateful for the opportunity to do this talk. It too is like a homeopathic remedy. Over the hour and a half that I've done this, I've changed. Um, and things that I was working on internally have changed. I've had um, I've had sort of symptoms that have come and gone, and I felt the energy of the group, and um, so I I'd like to think that it was a homeopathic occasion for me, and to be in the presence of so many homeopaths must have somewhat of a curative effect.
Okay, wonderful. Um, so if anybody has any last thoughts or comments, now is the time. Otherwise, we will say good night. Okay. So thank you very much, Richard, for your great insights. And again, if anybody would like to explore Richard's thoughts on homeopathy, further, please get a copy of his book, Homeopathy as Energy Medicine.
And
Um,
I thought people will listen to the other talks on Substack
mhm.
by searching Jovian bricolage.
Good. And
And,
that link was shared in the chat. And
oh,
yeah,
and I'm going to put this talk on it too.
very good.
This,
All right. Thank you,
thank,
everybody. Thank you, Richard. Have a great
thank
night.
you too.